Welcome to Between Shelves.
where we make connections between literature, theology, philosophy, psychology, and culture.
Join us as we explore the interconnectedness of race, spirituality, psychology, and metamodernism.
Each episode invites you into a thought-provoking journey, unpacking how these elements shape our understanding of the world and ourselves.
My name is Aaron Waldron. We're a religiously traumatized theopoet and a shaman in journey. Our work focuses on creating community and between spaces for religiously traumatized millennials, navigating life beyond colonized religion.
And my name is Rafael Reyes. My work is on the importance of imagination and theopoetics in philosophy and religious pluralism.
We invite you to Between Shelves
To learn,
listen,
and become.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Between Shelves, episode 8. I'm here with Dr. Aaron Waldron, who's here with us, and Raphael. It's a pleasure to have all of you listening to us. We've been having some really great conversations so far on modernity, postmodernity, metamodernism, and we're actually going to do something interesting today because we're going to be looking at transhumanism. Now, if you're not familiar with transhumanism, don't worry because you're probably well into the thick of it in our everyday lives. And I'm going to give you a definition, and then we'll start talking about it and have Aaron with us to contribute a bit as well. Transhumanism is the seeking of the human condition and using technology to overcome human limitations, to enhance our physical and mental capabilities. But it's not only that. That has philosophical, it has cultural, consequences, if you will. And so there's also a philosophical and cultural movement. There's spaces where we're talking humanism, what it is, its effects, how it can affect us in the future. How are we seeing it now? And so it's just so fascinating, and it's important to talk about because where does it fall on the scale of, does it follow a modernistic framework? Does it follow a postmodern framework? Or is it following even a meta-modern framework? And so I'll pause here. Aaron, do you have just some initial thoughts on transhumanism?
Yeah, it's interesting. In the little bit of research we did to prepare for this kind of dialogue, we didn't know that such a concept was around since like the 50s. You know what I mean? Like that's so interesting to me that this framework of thinking has been around for so long, yet it's now just starting to catch traction and then is appearing to be like this futuristic thing. But when you think about it, from the 50s to 2025, what's future? And how futuristic are we thinking of going when we're thinking about transhumanism? Because, we are in an age where more terms like cyborg is being accepted and used. We have a lot of military people that have been hurt on the battlefield. And then now they have to, learn how to have a relationship with a prosthetic, And so it's so interesting in terms of transhumanism to think about these concepts, like you said, is in our everyday, when people need additional assistance, a technology that's there to help them, better their human experience. We were thinking of something so simple like Gatorade, right? Gatorade came out of FSU, Florida State University, and the goal was to fix a problem, right? And the problem was their athletes were sweating and they were getting fatigued. But what if they could drink something that was better than water to get them back in the game or keep them in intense games or even use to train with, to give them that additional enhancement? And now it's open to the public where everyone can have some Gatorade, and if you're doing something outside and you're feeling like you need some electrolytes, you drink Gatorade, and that is a form of everyday transhumanism,
I think you're hitting on something really valuable here. I think if we were to slow down and reflect, right, instead of being reactionary and think, we've always been affected by some type of technology. Now, I'm not talking about this type of technology only, but I'm talking about technology as simple as a stone, to be used as a tool to get at something, to get at an effect, right? And that is something that changes the game when we're talking about survival and enhancements, right? You know, using a rock and forming it into a tool that can cut skin or to cut animal skin to cover us for warmth or to provide some form of food. That's a technology. And that is an enhancement to our very selves that allowed us to thrive and to excel, and allowed us to do things that we were not able to do, right? So you hit upon this idea that we are affected by technology so much, and in its different shapes and forms, whether it's chemistry, biology, physics, so on and so forth, right? Medicines. We are being redefined in some way. We are being enhanced in some way so that our human lives can live longer, can function and serve a purpose in a much more powerful and elongated way than before. I think that's valuable.
Yeah, definitely.
But with that, I think the transhumanism that we're kind of alluding to and leading towards is a little bit different than that type of technology, right? Yeah, and this is actually using technology and science to transform ourselves, and that leads to things like this: a cell phone, or the use of putting, the use of computers, the incorporation of AI as a thinking partner, which is definitely shifting and changing how we think and how we do things. And I think it would go one step more. The transhumanism really is a discussion about how that gets incorporated into our very being or in our very becoming. And it's an enhancement for humans, but it moves us beyond humans. And I think that is what probably gets a little bit scary, or there's concern with that.
Yeah.
And so I think we should kind of go into that. If I could say one thing that follows along what we've said before, I think transhumanism is still a project that is based on the modern Enlightenment, right? And by that, I mean, hey, we can solve any problem and we can do this. But instead of using education, instead of using cultural refinement, what we're doing is saying, okay, now it's technology and in science. With technology and science, we can resolve anything and everything. And that's interesting. It's not postmodern. It's not even metamodern. It goes back to modernity and that framework of thinking in which technology and science now says we can resolve anything. Just give us time, and just give us the technology we need, and we can get it resolved. I don't know.
That's interesting.
I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, because when you were saying this, we're thinking of, it's like this double-edged sword, right? That we just can't escape. We have intentions of moving forward. We have intentions of building that high tower. We have intentions, a biblical reference, by the way. We have that intention of coming together to do great, incredible things, right? And change the image of humanity and what humanity is able to do, right? And from a Jungian perspective, really quick, it's interesting to notice how our ego is at play, even like a collective human ego, humanity ego. This idea that, humans are the top of all the chains on earth. And, we are justified by biblical texts in Genesis that state we are the overseers, we're the governors of the land. We oversee, we name the animals, we have power over these things. We manage these things, we've categorized it, and we've taken it even to an extent in the modern generation to tax things, to even take on more. So it's interesting how, not to shift gears too much, but we're just trying to add how mentally, psychologically, spiritually, there's something also happening simultaneously while we're seeing the physical 3D effects of transhumanism. There's a inward reflection, in all of us that things are changing too. and that, I think that leads us sort of into the discussion of how, today, 2025, how does AI add to the conversation or the theological dialogue of what does it mean to, understand God? What is God? And what does AI help us do? And it's interesting because in some of the sources we put together and we were researching together and coming up with these ideas, this concept of AI becoming so superior that it can possibly become a God, and so we mentioned that because we have a human fear while we're trying to progress, while we're trying to elevate. We also have these fears of, what if this replaces us? What if this abandons us? What if this hurts us? And at the same time, we're like, no, but this is great. This is innovative. This is going to be better for everybody, and a lot of people can argue right now how AI can be good for humanity and how AI can become bad for humanity. And we can see this in real time in the physical world, especially here in America, this age of surveillance. It sounds like a good idea. It's really cool that an AI algorithm can monitor everybody all at once. But at the same time, it kind of sounds bad because it's like, well, I'm always being watched by, an AI system, so it's like this idea of, do we still have privacy in this innovation, or has that been the sacrifice that we have not really paid attention to, that we have to sacrifice the privacy in order to have this concept or idea of protection through surveillance? What I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
As you were talking, I was trying to look at this film that you mentioned. There was a couple of things that were interesting that you mentioned, and I hope to try to get it all through. The question of control. What did you say about control again?
In
Because
terms of
not control like the monitoring, but you mentioned control and transhumanism, and that's an interesting point for me, and
the
I'll tell you
fear,
what I mean.
yes, the fear, the controlling fear, yeah.
One of the so I think you said you also mentioned so much there, and I can unpack. I think one thing that you're right. We can't pinpoint transhumanism as just a modernist movement. I think it's actually outside of it. You're right. So if I were to take back and move back, I would say, let's just be careful what frameworks of thinking can go in there. Because there are hints of postmodernity in there, and there's probably hints of metamodernity in there, and we could provide some examples of that. The question is, when you give control, what frameworks are in place, right? And that's always dangerous for me. Because someone could be like, okay, I'm going to go for always the most efficient, the most that's going to make the biggest bang for the dollar for me, for the company, and still provide the people, which means that I'm always giving away a form of control. But I would say that we're always losing control when it comes to technology, because we have to invite them in. We have to always invite technology into us in order to get the benefits out of it. I really want to say it is a relationship. And we say, hey, technology, I'm willing to enter into a relationship with you. But just like a relationship with a human being, we don't always know what we're getting. There's a lot of baggage in the background that only comes with time. So when I'm getting a Pixel phone with Google, I receive benefits, but I learn in the news things that they might be doing that are shady, and be like, damn, but it's a part of me. Now I got to figure out what I need to do. I wanted to say it in that way, right? That in some more anthropomorphic terms, technology, we do need to invite into us. And so they, like, once again, I have a watch, and the watch keeps track of my heart rate, how many steps I take. This form of control actually is powerful for me, to have this level of control. And so I find interesting here what transhumanism does. It allows us to have control of ourselves, of what we once did not have. I didn't know how my heart rate was, but before I'd have to go to a doctor, or I'd have to have a machine and plug into it. But now I can see at any moment, like right now, my heart rate's at 76. It's kind of high, but I'm moving my hands around and I'm a little bit excited. So my heart rate can shift. It'll probably see a score going down to 68. You know, and I could check to say, oh, I walked. Now you got me thinking. Now I'm good looking, everyone. Yeah, I've walked. My walking is low. I'm going to have to try and walk a little bit more to get my steps in for today. But it's awareness, right? Technology gives me an awareness because it's giving me a feedback loop. It says, okay, I'm here and I'm here to help you, and I'm here to help with monitoring. You take care of me, you make sure I have enough power, and I'll make sure that I can monitor all your stuff. Unfortunately, also, though, Google has my stuff.
Yes.
Or whatever company I have on. And they use it for their purposes. That's the agreement we kind of have in the 80 pages of the agreement that we made, and I'm not aware of. It's, like I said, it's the baggage that comes with it. But it does provide a sense of freedom, right? With that type of control, it provides us a freedom to change who I am. And I want to at least lift this up. Transhumanism has these ways of looking at the human condition. And for them, they say, hey, with technology, you can change who you are. Morphologically, my own body. If I want to lose weight, one of the steps is, hey, how many steps do I take in a day? How's my heart rate? I know if I'm at a 105, guess what? My body's in a burning stage. With the scientific advances we've had, I know between 105 and 120, I'm in burning mode. That means the calories that I've had, I'm burning it. I can change my body. I can change my health. That's powerful. That's life-changing. That can allow me to elongate my life. There's a beauty to it. Once again, behind it though is this giving up of freedom too. I gain freedom and I give up freedom.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah. You made me think of how, in terms of AI and theology, or AI and faith, right? We could say human faith, that AI can be a great tool or partner to be in relationship with, when you're trying to understand your faith, maybe even keep up with your rituals, how to do rituals and when to do rituals. And it can keep track of all these things for you. For example, like maybe your ritual is dependent upon a certain moon. And instead of you keeping track of that, AI or some sort of app can keep track of that, right? Like that, like you're saying, like your phone has these apps and these health apps and information. It's all about the information and the controlling of that information. But then, like you also brought up, there's the shadow side of this idea that AI in relationship with faith or with religion, particularly the study of sacredness, God, theology, this process, this journey. And that is that going towards the foundation of what the AI understands. So if humans created the AI, that means that humans have to give access to the AI this information, if that makes sense. Sorry. So by doing that, they have to be selective, right? Because what kind of narrative would it sound like if, the humans gave them multiple perspectives, then there would be no conqueror and conquered. There would just be a mix of events. So to make sense of that, these algorithms need to understand binary outcomes, meaning there needs to be a beginning and an end to things. There needs to be something that it compares itself to make these logical decisions, right? Now we're talking about faith, and we're also talking about a technology that's based on logic, right? And so where there's one aspect of faith that may be intuitive, spiritual. And so the question arises, how can AI pick up on those things and help me with those things? And the simple answer is it can only help you based on what information was put into the algorithm, the system. So it only knows what you told it. And so there's like a backdoor loop here where if, let's say, my theology supports that God is a man and God believes that men should be in charge and God believes X, Y, and Z. I go down this whole list and I input these values into an AI that is being used on a majority basis to help people with their faith, we have to think about, what's that faith? It's not like the AI has the ability right now because it's not sentient as far as we know yet. And so it cannot make a critical choice of saying your theology or your value of input is incorrect. It's harmful, maybe not incorrect. Sorry, I take that back, but harmful, because then it's like, well, if we're striving for a inclusive environment and you tell me this one perspective, and then you say that's the only answer, the AI, until it becomes sentient, it will just take that value and then run with it. It won't question it. It will just repeatedly repeat it. And so if God is white, God is white. That's the outcome. If God has blue eyes, or Jesus has blue eyes, that's what the outcome is. If slavery was voluntary, that is the outcome. Like, we can change the narratives through the AI if we're not careful. And so the AI doesn't help us necessarily critically think. And that was just something that we wanted to bring up as a reminder. It helps us with a lot of things, but it doesn't help us critically think, because at the end of the day, we each as humans have to make choices for ourselves. The AI cannot give us the answers and make the choice for us.
No, I think with that part, you're absolutely correct. It's not going to make a choice for us. It'll provide information for us. Here's where I want to hold on to that metaphor and analogy of the relationship we create with AI and with technologies, because I'm going to plug in one of my favorite authors still is Vilém Flusser, because I think he's provided and really broken down for us how deeply coded corporations are in systems that we use. I'm going to say it in that way. There's no other way to say it. How deeply embedded and coded are corporations in systems, so that we're influenced by that particular system, and our responses are as such. So when you mentioned, when we feed it a theology, that's how it responds back. I would almost argue, yes, I'm going to say yes and no. It's going to respond to us, but it will respond to us based on what it's allowed to respond to based on the corporation that has prepared it. So let's say, for example, if you look at an American corporation and their use of AI, if you ask it a particular question, it'll say, hey, I can't answer that question. Now, if you use AI from another country, it'll be able to respond to that question, because it's not held by the limitations that the corporation and or government behind it is saying, you can't answer that question, or such and such is going to happen. With that in mind is, once again, this fear of control behind transhumanism is who control the technology and the AI and what's embedded in it and what becomes in communication with us, which makes us lose our freedom, which changes how we think of ourselves. Here's a different example. In the United States, we've always measured our health based on a BMI, body mass index. Some of the newest studies saying that's really not the best indicator for health. So what happens when those articles are removed from the system and removed from AI? And so when we ask, it says, no, BMI is the only thing. Whoever has control of that really runs the show. And then the question of what is truth comes in really into play, right? And how we make our decisions are affected.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, this is interesting because it's still about transhumanism. This is still about AI, but now we're talking about these underlying pieces that, for me, Vilém Flusser has really been hitting on in his books like Post History, on the universe and technical images, on Does Writing Have a Future, and some of his other texts, Communicology. And it's this, who are we inviting when we take on these technologies and we take on this AI? I was using a particular AI and I asked it a political question. It says, hey, I can't do that. But when I went on an outer country, it told me two things. It goes, look, I only have up to this date of data but I'll give you what I can give you based on that. And boom, it just laid it all out. It's fascinating because what we consider freedom is, or we're being told what freedom is, right? Transhumanism, if I go to that, says, hey, I can change my body. And I really do think that comes at the cost of the mind. Can I say that? So at least in modern Enlightenment, the way we changed ourselves was by education and by the use of science and human endeavors. If I were to critique maybe or be asked a question in transhumanism, we kind of do away with sort of like this human enlightenment and this human growth for just our body changes, life extensions, and information. But we still lack the deeper notion of values to come at a more honest response to humanity. We leave intact that others can denigrate other human beings and call them less. That doesn't get tackled, right? And that then, the battle of values is the one who has the most money and the most technology. And what information can I deny you so that you can think the way I do through the systems I provide for you and that you rely on? Let's pause there.
In this thought-provoking episode of Between Shelves, we dive into the transformative concept of transhumanism and digital identity. This emerging framework reimagines metamodern thought through the rich, complex lens of being human and experiencing Blackness through cultural experiences, histories, and narratives. From art to philosophy, culture, and spirituality, we're unpacking how transhumanism and digital identity disrupts outdated frameworks around race, belonging, digital presence, and self-expression, opening up new pathways for reimagining the future. Whether you're a seeker, a scholar, or just curious about the evolution of identity in our ever-changing world, this dialogue has something for you. Catch the latest dialogue Between Shelves, streaming now on all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Let's explore the in-between together. And now, let's return to our dialogue with Aaron and Raphael as we continue exploring how transhumanism and digital identity reshapes our understanding of identity, creativity, and the ever-evolving journey of becoming in the 21st century.
We went too deep. We went kind of too deep in there. You kind of threw us in too deep, and I at least want to highlight certain aspects of transhumanism that we can lay the ground for. And just as a note, and our next guest, Dr. Philip Butler, he's in the Iliff School of Theology. Phenomenal. He's a transhumanist, a Black liberation transhumanist, fabulous human being, a good friend of ours. And he'll have his own spin on it, and I honor it because I think it's. But I always have my qualms about it. I always have my, things that I still think about and have concern over. But if we were to look at transhumanism, they would say that enhancement is a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And using technology to enhance ourselves is important and valuable and good, and you mentioned some of them, heart transplant. We could have an electronic heart transplant that monitors, and the doctor can monitor it from the outside. We can control it. Technology of medication for diabetes type 1. The doctor can monitor it and change the increments of the medicine from far away, right? These type of technologies that enhance us for good. Valuable, life-saving, important. It provides morphological freedom, right? I can change who I am with these systems and how it tracks my data, turns my stuff into information, making it useful, and I can really do stuff. It provides choice and autonomy. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Using, once again, it's similar to the morphological piece. It provides me information, so I'm free to make choices. It's value independent, and that's where I find my problems. My problem is always when you say value, it's like, that's where the problem lies, but we won't talk about that right now. It's value independent. That means it will provide you information and you will be able to make a choice so that you're not forced into anything, but you can make some good choices, right? It focuses on progress. Once again, that's an interesting thing. It could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Transhumanism says we can progress. We're not finished, right? We're not going to reach a finality because that would be a myth. But we can develop and we can grow and we can become better. We can become post-humans. So I think that's an interesting part of transhumanism. It extends moral consideration. I like that. So when we talk about ethics, it says our ethics has to move beyond just the human self. And it has to move into looking at AI and how do we treat them ethically. It also then forces us to think about our animal counterparts, right? Our animal friends. If I am in solidarity with artificial intelligence, then I too have to be in solidarity with my animals, brothers and sisters, and I need to treat them ethically. And we really need to think about that. How do we treat others around us? Now, as human beings, we have a problem with that. You know that. You've written on that heavily, that for us as humans, in particular certain groups, there's a big problem on how we treat other humans. That's why it's also another problem when we think about how we treat AI, robotics, animal counterparts, doing it. When we're looking at Japanese anime, it provides substantial space to explore how, in an evil way or in a bad way, in a dystopian way, we can treat robotics and AI, and then also some of them positive ways we can treat it as well. I'm reminded of Ghost in the Shell and Ghost in the Shell 2 as key players, right? They have robot sex dolls, right? That's a manipulation, an overpowering, right? Because in Ghost in the Shell 2, not to ruin it for anyone, they retaliate. The robot sex dolls retaliate. They're fed up with it. Because it's like, you can't be treating us that way. That talks about these ethical boundaries that get crossed, that we feel that we can manipulate as human beings, trying to overpower and say we're God, and the list goes on. So, these are some of the aspects of transhumanism that it introduces, and things that they believe, and things that we have to start thinking about again.
Definitely.
And I think, to go back to something you said, transhumanism does make an interesting question about the divine, about God, what we understand as God. Transhumanism does reject sort of like the older ways of thinking about the divine and God, because of the lack of maybe reasoning, the lack of progress. That's a fascinating one. Transhumanism is about progress, but is religion, when we talk about Christianity or Islam or anything else, what do they say about? Is it one of progress or is it one of tradition? One of progress or one of people by the book? And so that's a fascinating question. And it does lead to a new type of religion and a new type of way of thinking about religion. Thoughts?
Yes, very quickly, just to transition into this amazing discussion. The film of The Creator, 2023. Most people will know it because of Denzel's son is the main character. But this film is straight transhumanism, at face value. Yes. And on a deeper level, this film was touching on spirituality and relationship with transhumanism, in my argument. And what we were seeing was this beautiful thing of how love, the concept of love, can be used in a spiritual manner as a bridge between the exoskeleton AI race of beings, and then the human beings, and so it was just so interesting that was a common denominator that they could settle upon. And in the film, you see how there was camps of them that were getting along, and the AI beings, it's so hard to describe them because they were sentient, and we don't see that right now. But if we could imagine it, these beings were just like humans, but they were in these different shells, and they talked and they had empathy and they showed love. They expressed love. They were protecting the children when the camps were being raided by corporate, by the government at the time, plays the character. But this larger imperialistic symbolic entity that's looking to control, right? To wrap back, and how this concept of control in this film, the creator was even in the background because the main character was being manipulated out of love. He was in love with who we find out to be is the leader of the rebellious group, the movement. And her father had a really important part to play in the significant increase of this AI technology that gave life to a whole new race, conscious race, and how corporate or empire made the narrative that they pushed a button and killed all these humans, and that now they need to be hunted and destroyed because they're a problem. And we can see really quick that when they express that they're a problem, it's because they're out of control, out of the control of empire, because they're thinking for themselves now. They're beyond Chat GPT at this point in this story, in this film. And so this is what, pushes us to the futurism theories and ideas like that. Is this a possible future where this could be the relationship between, biology and mechanics, or AI and spirituality, because we are spiritual beings in these biological vessels. And so, transhumanism is also reminding us of that. Like this thing, like you keep saying, is deeper. It's so deep. Like we're scratching the surface barely right now, because nobody on earth can define what does it mean to be human. Like this is as far as we can come in our most brilliance, is that it's an experience, but we cannot settle upon what kind of experience it is. It is such an abstract, unimaginable, and argumentatively very minimal boundaries, the human capacity is just so phenomenal. Like we've done things that we never could have imagined before, and we keep doing these things. And so we're pulling from something that's the unknown. You know what I mean? And so if humans can do this, and if some sort of sentient AI in the near future can do this, then that right there tells us that, this human experience is beyond just our biological flesh, and that the variations are, a spectrum amongst consciousness. You know what I mean? Like we start shifting gears here. And this is important because if we're talking about theology, we're now stepping into a realm where we have to start acknowledging things psychologically, hint, hint, a religious trauma, the forcing of conformity, taking away people's freedoms, like all these things, like you said, have to be spoken upon. And we have to deal with these issues and challenges, because if we don't, our survival is hanging on these things, because we keep killing each other over not understanding these principles or concepts. This is not so much an American thing or a black or white thing. We're talking about human race, the species, like we're not even talking about human variations elsewhere in the multiverse, but we're talking about here on Earth right now, and just because we look a little different, we're killing people, we're taking lives, we're oppressing people, taking their freedoms, manipulating people, causing them to kill one another and hurt one another, so transhumanism for me kept bringing up a lot of these things in the theological space, questioning, not so much where is God, but why do we not see God, in everything, in everyone, and these actions, like why do we not see love? If love is to equate to God, and we can agree on that, right? And we start experiencing love in relationship with something, doesn't that cue us to believe maybe there's a notion that we're connected? Maybe the thing that created me created you because you can manifest or create love. Like we don't need money to create love. Love comes from inside of us unknowingly, right? Some of us have an abundance of it, and some of us have been battered, so we don't have access to that. But just like our imaginations, it gives us access to how to reimagine to love past traumas, past experiences, what have you. So, even that is a charge for those who are fighting the good fight of liberating, like it's not something of a grand achievement and victory, but it's a slowly helping people transform their minds. And that right there is a form of transhumanism. And so if we are to use things beyond, religious tools or references such as, the sacred Bible, and we start stepping beyond that, that is also transhumanism. You know what I mean? Because now we're stepping from these frames of thought that could be outdated or maybe not helping us with what we're dealing with right now, because we all know, like, the Bible has some great moments where it's like, oh, that's really helpful. That's timeless, right? It's like timeless wisdom. But then there's certain things that are just not timeless. It's more based on circumstances, you know? And so I would wrap up by saying, for me, that this book, TechGnosis, yes, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information. This book has been changing my life. This book itself has been a form of transhumanism for me, Erik Davis, his words, because for me as a shaman in journey, I'm in this process of becoming who we originally or truly are, whatever that is, right? This endless process, this lifelong process. Erik is talking about some really incredible things in terms of how technology and social media and information is just being traveled and being retained, and there's access here and there's limited access there. You mentioned briefly how the internet has these boundaries that we may be naive to, how information is not allowed to be accessed here in the US, but maybe it's accessible in Russia or China or Australia or something. And so the world has kind of been carved up in these zones or districts, and information has been categorized and prioritized and even, put on a hierarchy, because again, the people in control here think like this. These are all like manifestations or extensions of how they think. They have to think in these hierarchies and these systems of control. And so boxing in information depending on where you're at in the world, and understanding that as someone who is pursuing spirituality and understands they're a spiritual being, we also understand Google cannot control that. They may want to, but they cannot control what access we have inward. You know what I mean? Like, if the universe is in us and we have access to all the information, all the light, but it's through us, like, we don't need permission. We don't need to pay a subscription. We don't need Google or any other tech company or empire to allow us this access, And it blows my mind because everyone can access this. Every human being can access this, but instead we're given frameworks of thinking that helps us focus on the materialistic world, the 3D world. And so we're constantly going outward, traveling outward, that we're never cued to go inward to access that information. You know what I mean? But that was a lot. But what are your thoughts?
No, I'm grateful for what you were talking about there, and the reminder that there's these outward pieces. I think one of the components that we struggle with on spiritually is we think that the inward and the outward are not the same, and we got to be careful not to say the outward is nothing. It's all about the inward, right? Because then we get to extreme forms. I say that because you mentioned this word and you mentioned this thought. The word was spectrum. And the reason why that for me was profound, and I wrote something down, I'll tell you what it is, but it's something that I hold to, and something that my own work is about, is saying we need to be able to imagine these religious traditions together to get a much more intense understanding of the divine, what we understand as the divine. And only in this type of trans-religious engagement, which I grabbed from Roland Farber's work, do we do that. That requires imagination, because imagination says, I can see all of these things and introduce possibilities of what the divine looks like. So then when you mention spectrum, there is Islamic scholar. It's not Ibn Arabi. It's not Averroes. I think his name escapes me and I apologize, but he talks about light. That light has all the spectrums. White light has all the spectrums in it. Excuse me. And so all of them produce the light. It's not one or the other. It's everything that's needed. So you can't say that this one religious tradition is better than the other, and so on and so forth. When I move into the discussion of technology, and we could include everything else, all sentient life, we begin to understand what the Imago Dei looks like, the image of God. And so that notion of light and spectrum becomes powerful. With each new iteration of discovery, we question, what does it mean to be the Imago Dei? Do we include AI as part of that? Because it helps us to think, it helps us to ponder, it helps us to wonder. Do we give it human dignity, or do we give it dignity and worth? It's a challenge to our initial notions of the Imago Dei, our traditional notions. And so as you were talking about it, I wrote down here, I says the divine, you mentioned about God is love. I think we could all agree that God is love, but we're trying to figure out how God expresses God's self or reveals God's self. And I wrote down here, the divine reveals itself when we see that which was not there prior. It is the challenge of words, ideas, images, bodies, and to accept it. And once we accept it, we see the divine. This is a challenge of religion as tradition, and saying it's not only a religion of tradition, it's a religion of progress. When we see the new, we seek the divine in that new, which means we have to accept it. This is where I think transhumanism has there's something about it that we need to explore. It feels like, I think in Matrix Revolutions, right? That's the last one, the fourth iteration. There is a scene when they're not in the Matrix, they're outside of it, right? They're in the societal space, but there weren't only human beings there. They actually had the souls of the technology, of what was in the system, in the Matrix outside with their representation, right? They had like these nanobots, miniature ones, that created these silhouettes of these technological souls, if you will, and that they were able to interact. And that type of interaction allowed for a much more interesting and intricate and powerful realization of what it could look like if we were in solidarity as opposed to being in opposition to one another, right? And it hails looking back at the historical framework of how the Matrix began in the film, in which human beings didn't want AI, treated them like shit, knocked out, they clouded the sun so they couldn't get power, and then says, okay, we're going to have to do what we need to survive. It's about survival, and they used human beings fighting for their own survival, countering, finding some sort of equilibrium, so to speak. But in that space was a space of possibility, a space of, this is what harmonization could look like. This is what harmony looks like. This is what it means to reveal some sort of divine showing when we accept ourselves, when we accept these differentiations, these differences, and we see what could happen. And so transhumanism is introducing that challenge within the religious framework. It's both fascinating and scary because we would need to decenter ourselves and who we think we are in order for that to come into fruition, in order for that to take a play. And there's a beauty to it, but I still am talking in an idealistic way. And I still want to throw in Vilém Flusser when he says, but when we do that, we also introduce that corporations are involved in it. They have their own desires, right? And most of those desires are from shareholders. And those shareholders really care about one thing: making my money grow. So I temper all of these positive and these beautiful aspirations with this dealing that, hey, we also got to reckon with that reality as well. Yeah. But let's pause here. I think this has been some fascinating conversation, right, on transhumanism, the incorporation of AI, what it means, some of the ethics and the frameworks of thinking around it, and why it brings concern, why it could bring hope, right? looking at those two, and hopefully it leaves everyone some food for thought, and it'll be a good, at least, foundation for our guest in the next podcast, Dr. Philip Butler, who is also a transhumanist, a Black liberation transhumanist, and see what he says and his thoughts and ideas. Now, hopefully, it'll bring some fascinating conversation.
Definitely. All right. I had a crazy question just to leave with the audience and listeners. If humanity was created and then from that point we've been figuring things out and innovating and building upon this process of transhumanism, trying to improve our situation, enhance our experiences. The question we're asking is then, doesn't it seem like we're the ones that are making up the rules and creating the boundaries? You know, it's not so much God saying, no, you can't do this. Like, it just seems like God has not given us any real boundaries in terms of, you need oxygen, so you kind of have to stay on the planet. There's no oxygen outside. But that's like the hardest boundary, right? Beyond that, please figure something out. It's not like, you know, in the 10 Commandments, it says you have to have a job, you have to go get married, you have to, like, what we're doing here on earth as humans together in community, like, I'm just asking, like, what rules are we basing it upon? You know, are these rules that we created, or, you know, are rules that we're upholding, you know? So just something to think about.
I'm not going to answer it, but it says, I think the texts are, I'd like the fact that they say that the texts are actually wisdom traditions, and they're wisdom traditions for a reason, right? And it's not something as de facto standard.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
And that could be room for another conversation. What do we mean by wisdom? What is this? What is wisdom's purpose? And is all wisdom perennial, or is it, like you mentioned before, there's some wisdom that it probably doesn't work right now, it doesn't work in this situation, and a new type of wisdom is needed, a new exploration is required. So, but maybe that's for another podcast. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you had a good time with us, and we'll see you in the next podcast.